Chaim, Melech, Melech, Hafetz b'chaim, Bambai, Hallelujah, ding, 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 nine, 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 nine. Ay, 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 ay. Elohim Chaim. So I'll say L'chaim, L'chaim. Okay, 1 second. Okay, good. People are coming aboard here. Okay, so we're going to start with something hopefully everyone knows, but most likely it might just go like right over our heads. Today is the 25th day of Elul, which means that according to tradition, creation is beginning today. Today is the first day of creation, even though we tend to think of it as Rosh Hashanah, but we all know that Rosh Hashanah is really the 6th day of creation, commemorates the 6th day of creation, and creation begins from today. So I just want to bless everyone right off the bat that we should connect to this energy of creation, recreation, and we should integrate it so deeply that we are renewed at our very, very source. So I'm going to try to give over a few Torahs about the 25th of Elul, so we can really, really connect to this energy, and hopefully the whole rest of the week leading up to Rosh Hashanah, that we should be aware that this is when creation is actually happening, and we should connect to that energy. So in Kabbalah and Chassidut, it's explained that Rosh Hashanah is 45 days after Tu B'Av. It's exactly 45 days after Tu B'Av. So what's the significance of this? So first of all, in the Talmud, there is a very long and fascinating and detailed discussion as to when actually God created the world. We have two traditions. One tradition is God created the world in Tishrei, like we're used to observing, celebrating with Rosh Hashanah. But there's an equally strong opinion that the world was created in Nisan, exactly 6 months before. Now we know that Rosh Hashanah is the new year of years, but Nisan is the new year of months. And there's actually this incredible discussion as to in which date was the world created. The Gemara ends apparently without making a clear statement as to which one is right. Now we know that we've been celebrating Rosh Hashanah for thousands of years as the birthday of the world, as creation. But it wasn't until about approximately 800 years ago that Rabbeinu Tam explained how we can see both of these opinions as being true. And this is what we basically hold, is that the world is created in thought on Rosh Hashanah and in actuality in Nisan. So again, it's different than many people think of it. That there's, in a sense, two levels of creation. One in thought and one in deed. We go through this all the time. We have a thought of something that we want to do or accomplish. And it could be a day later, a week later, a year later. It could be 20 years later that we actually accomplish what we thought about. So it doesn't come as a surprise that there are these two different levels. There's the creative process of thought, the creative process of actually doing something. So I'm mentioning all of this because if 45 days before Rosh Hashanah was Tu B'Av, so the word for machshava, or yeah, right, for machshava is choshev ma. The idea of thought literally means to think of ma, of something, of whatness, of essence. So the word ma equals 45. So as it were, when does the thought arise in God's mind to create the world? And 45 days before, Choshev Ma. God thought of creation on Tu B'Av. Now this is an amazing idea. It's an amazing idea. Why? It relates to today because we know that 45 days after Tu B'Av is Rosh Hashanah, but that's the sixth day of creation. What was created on the sixth day? Adam. What is the numerical value of the word Adam? 45. Ma. Choshev ma. That God, when God was creating the world, the whole purpose was to create Adam. Adam is the last of the creations, but like we say in Shabbos, Sof ma'aseh v'machshava techila. The end of deed is the first in thought. That the deed comes from first in thought. So this gives us a very deep connection to the creator of the world. That God created the world for Adam, for us. But we're going to go one step deeper here. Now, if today is the first day of creation, so what's the relationship of Tu B'Av to today? 40 days. There are 40 days between Tu B'Av and Chaf He Elul. Now, what do we say about 40 days? So one of the traditions that we have is 40 days before the formation of an embryo, a voice goes out in heaven and says, this neshama is meant for that neshama. This is what's called soulmates. And this is quoted very, very often, this idea that 40 days before a soul is formed, already, in a sense, it's paired with another soul. So if you're following me, so what I'm going to say next is just an awesome idea about Tu B'Av. What do we think about on Tu B'Av? It's the time where young men and young women get together. The women go down, they dance in the vineyards, and the men follow, and shidduchim happen. It's the day of love. In Israel today, this holiday, which was almost forgotten in a sense, is being, in a sense, resurrected. And now it's here. It's called the Holiday of Love. And of course, this year it didn't happen because of the pandemic. But on Tu B'Av now, there are festivals all over Israel now of music and bringing young people together. So what are we saying on a very deep level? 40 days before today, on Tu B'Av, a voice came out of heaven, and God is saying, the Jewish people are my soulmate. So this is a whole different idea of Tu B'Av. It's a very, very awesome idea here. That 40 days ago, on Tu B'Av, the soulmate energy between the creator of the world and Am Yisrael, a voice went out in heaven and established that. So this is very, very important to keep in mind as we go into the Chagim. And we'll discuss this more, but the days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are called Yamim HaNora'im, the days of awe. But we're very focused on judgment and din. But we shouldn't forget that underneath all of this is that we want to strengthen our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But that is far more important than the idea of the judgment. I remember that one time someone asked Reb Shlomo, I was there, asked Reb Shlomo, after all of the davening of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, what's the bottom line? Like, what are we trying to get to? What are we trying to accomplish here? So Reb Shlomo, I remember he really thought about it. He didn't answer him like really quickly. And then he said, bottom line is we want to be able to open our hearts and to say to Hashem, Rabbanu Sha'olam, I want to be so close to you. Please let me be close to you. That's what I want. I want to be close to you. Rabbi Shlomo said that if a person can get to that mental, emotional, spiritual place, all the judgment of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, it'll happen. It will happen. But we have to remember what we're trying to accomplish here. And so 40 days ago, on Tu B'Av, a voice went out of heaven saying, we are soulmates forever. So that's just a beautiful idea. Very, very beautiful idea. Okay, so now we're going to move to a different idea about creation. The first part of the class is we want to connect to Chaf Hei Elul. And we're going to look at the last verse in the Torah. The last verse in the Torah says all the miracles and wonders that Moshe did be'enei kol Yisrael, in the eyes of all of Israel. And the Torah ends. With saying that Moshe did these great miracles and wonders in the eyes of all of Israel. And then on Simchas Torah, we will begin again from Bereshit. Bereshit bara Elokim et Shemaim b'Toretz. So really, Bereshit and the whole first day of creation is happening today. That's why I chose to speak about this. So in Chassidut, I mean, in general, and Rashi does this a lot, what's called juxtaposition. Many, many, many times in the first Rashi of a Parsha, he'll say, what's the connection between the end of the previous Parsha and the beginning of this Parsha? Other times, a mitzvah is given. Sometimes As you know, that there's certain parshas where mitzvah after mitzvah are given, and it's not 100% clear what's the connection between the different mitzvah. And again, Rashi will say, why is this mitzvah next to this mitzvah? They'll give an answer. It's called juxtaposition. So in Chassidut, many people read the last words of the Torah together with the first words of the Torah. Be'enei kol Yisrael b'reishit bara Elokim et hashmayim v'et haaretz. In the eyes of all of Israel, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So this goes along with the Torah that we just gave, a very deep connection, is this idea that since the soul is an actual part of God above, chelak Eloka mima'al mamash, an actual part of God above. So we can understand the midrash that says that when God wanted to create the world, he took advice. He discussed it with the souls of the tzaddikim. So all the commentaries ask, what tzaddikim? There's no creation. There are no souls. What is the midrash talking about? Who did he take advice from? Who did he consult? And so one of the answers is he consulted with the future souls of the tzaddikim. But where were they? Well, they were actually a part of God. So this midrash is describing what we'll call an inner dialogue that God is having with himself, with the future. And so what we learn from this is that, in a sense, we were at the creation. In the eyes of all of Israel, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. There's a part, and we have to dig very, very, very deep in our neshamas, but we actually do this every Shabbos. Every Shabbos when we make Kiddush, we are testifying that God created the heavens and the earth. So the obvious question is, how can we give testimony if we weren't there? I can say, I see the results of creation, and I believe that God did it, but it's deeper than that. We're giving testimony that we know that God created the heavens and the earth. Would it be that the whole world knew this? That's one of the things we daven for in Rosh Hashanah, that the whole world will recognize and acknowledge God as King, God as Creator. So this idea that in the beginning, we were there, our souls on some deep, 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 deep level. And this, without getting into it, this is the secret of one of Rabbi Nachman's stories of the 7 beggars. In one of the stories, there's a group of people, and they each one tried to say the first thing they remember. And each one, it gets more and more primordial until they're talking about, in a sense, remembering even before there was creation. And then the youngest of them said, I remember all of this, and I remember nothing at all. And they all went, whoa. He must be really, in a sense, the oldest of all of us, even though he appears to be the youngest, because he remembers what's called yesh me'ayin, something from nothing. So there's a part in all of our neshamas that remembers not just the yesh of creation, but the nothingness that precedes, the primordial nothingness that precedes. So that's one understanding. But we look at Rashi, and he explains, what was it that Moshe did in the eyes of all of Israel? It just says all the miracles and wonders that Rashi did. So the Rashi is very surprising, because we would think he would say Moshe performed the 10 plagues. He brought water from a rock. He split the sea. But that's not what Rashi says. Rashi says, what was the great wonder that he did in the eyes of all of Israel? He broke the luchot. He broke the tablets of the law when he came down and he saw the golden calf. So what is Rashi alluding to? And I have to mention here that there is a tradition that Rashi wrote his Perush B'Ruach HaKodesh with divine inspiration. And one of the understandings of divine inspiration, in fact, some people might have my book, I wrote a whole book on prophecy and divine inspiration, but one of the klalim, one of the general principles of divine inspiration, whether it's in Tehillim, whether it's in the words of the Nevi'im, the prophets, in the writings of the Ketuvim, that when a person writes from a place of Ruach HaKodesh, they don't always know the full ramifications of what they're saying. It's coming through them. They're inspired to say certain words or express certain ideas, emotions. But because it's coming from Ruach HaKodesh, it's not really coming from them per se. It's coming through them. So there's some deep allusions to what Rashi is saying. It's not clear at all on, let's call it the pshat, why Rashi chose to say that that's the miracle and wonder that he did in the eyes of all of Israel. That's the last Rashi in the Chumash, that he broke the tablets. But what this is alluding to is something very deep. When we start the Torah and say, Bereshit bara Elokim et hashmayim et haaretz, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. According to Kabbalah, this means this creation, Olam HaTikun. But what about all the previous worlds? That comes before. Bereshit begins what's called Olam HaTikun. So what comes before? What's called Olam HaTohu, the world of chaos. Why is it called the world of chaos? Is because the lights were so exalted, so pure, so godly. The initial vessels of creation could not properly hold them, and they shattered in what's called Shvirat HaKelim, in the breaking of the vessels. And according to the Arizal, our world, and this goes so far in explaining the nature of this world. This world is made up of the broken pieces of the previous world. Just like the teachings of reincarnation is that this time we are trying to fix things that we didn't fix properly in the previous time. It's not a punishment. It's an opportunity. It's a great chesed. The word for reincarnation in Hebrew is Gilgul, which equals 72, which equals chesed. It's actually considered a chesed that God gives us another chance. Just like on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, God gives us another chance. New year, to get it right. That's why there's tshuva, there's forgiveness, there's atonement. So we have another chance. This is a great chesed. So this world is made up of the broken pieces of the previous world. So now you can understand Rashi on a very deep level, that he's alluding, the breaking of the tablets is symbolic of the breaking of the vessels. Why? Only 40 days before, again, the number 40, only 40 days before, Am Yisrael stood at Har Sinai and had a once in a history revelation of God. But obviously, as frail human beings, our vessels were not strong enough. In fact, we know that after the first two commandments that we heard directly from God, the people came to Moshe and said, you talk to God. It's too much for us. And even God said, that's okay. In a sense, they're right. The revelation at Sinai was beyond any experience we can really explain. That's why the Midrash says that every word that God spoke, their neshamas left their bodies. And angels had to come and bring back the souls. So the breaking of the vessels is, in a sense, a mirror image of the breaking, the breaking of the luchot. The tablets is a mirror image of the breaking of the vessels. So now we can understand why in Kabbalah and Chassidut they say, read the end of the Torah along with the beginning. Le'enei kol Yisrael, Bereshit bara Elokim et Shemaim et Haaretz. So we know that the last, everyone quotes this, the last letter in the Torah is a lamed, the last letter of the word Yisrael. And the first letter of the Torah is a bet. So of course this spells out lev, a heart, a good heart. And we could add, when we said before, what's the bottom line of Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur? Very, very similar to what we could ask, what's the ultimate purpose of the 7 weeks of Sfirat HaOmer? So there are 49 days of the Omer, and 49 equals the expression Lev Tov, a good heart. So what are we supposed to accomplish during Sfirat HaOmer, when all is said and done? To develop a good heart. What is the Torah all about? What is Olam HaTikun all about? A good heart. That's why when Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai asked his 5 top students, what's the best way for a person to act in the world? What's the correct attitude to have? And they all gave their answers. And Elazar ben Arach said, Lev Tov, a good heart. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, I like his answer the best because all the other answers were incorporated in that. A Lev Tov. But listen to this, we have this expression, I'm sure everyone's heard. There's nothing as whole as a broken heart. Ein davar shalem kelev nishbar. There's nothing as whole as a broken heart. Of course, that's a very paradoxical statement. But at this time of year, when we are connecting to creation, we're connecting to tshuva, and as hopefully we'll get to in a few minutes, the sounds of the shofar, the shvarim and the trua, are crying sounds. That's what the Chazal sages tell us. It's a cry from the heart. So the beginning of creation is linked, is juxtaposed to the breaking of the vessels. So when we want to do tshuva, when we want to make new vessels for a new year, part of making those vessels is to break our hearts a little bit. In fact, the Ari said, anyone who doesn't cry at least one tear on Rosh Hashanah, didn't get it. Now remember, crying a tear does not mean being depressed or sad. It's just connecting to the awesomeness of the day, the awesomeness of the presence of Hashem, and the idea of judgment. That's what we're going to discuss in another few minutes. And we're, in a sense, temporarily overwhelmed with the energy of the day. And it leads to at least one tear. So this is a very, very beautiful idea, this connecting the end of the Torah with the beginning of the Torah, especially today, because today is Bereshit bara Elokim et Hashemayim v'et haaretz. So again, I have to emphasize, a broken heart does not mean depression or sadness or low self-esteem or defeatism or any of that. It just means sometimes when we look at ourselves, we look at the world around us, that we are very aware of how much brokenness there is in the world. So I want to end this with just one more idea. It's a very simple idea, but also very awesome. When we say Bereshit bara Elokim, in the beginning God created. The word for created, bara, is the same root of the word to heal. Briut. La briut. You want to bless someone to have good health, la briut. So I learned this from Rav Ginsburg. So he said the other way of reading the first verse of the Torah is along with, not instead of, but along with, in the beginning God created, is in the beginning God began to heal. So you ask, what is there to heal? It's a new creation. This is taking into account the previous world and the breaking of the vessels. So this world begins with healing. And that's why, especially today, we need to really, really emphasize that one of the strongest messages that we as the Jewish people can bring to the world is the idea of tikkun olam and of healing. Especially now, where not only do we need physical healing, but so many people have been so stressed out and so challenged the last 6 months. I can't remember a time where the whole world needs a complete healing, a total healing. I have to just jump in here. Alana, am I seeing that you have your arm in a cast? So I'm going to say, I just noticed, I'm going to say Refuah Shlema. I just noticed it. I'm sorry, I didn't see it before. But just as I'm saying it, I see Refuah Shlema. Complete healing. Okay, so one last thing. It says in Tehillim that God is close to those with a broken heart. So we might think that if our hearts are broken, God doesn't want to hear about it. It's just the opposite. God not only wants to hear about it, but he, in a sense, is a big part of the healing, is to somehow bring a consciousness of whatever we're going through, that there is some purpose and there is a higher tikkun that is being made here, even if we're not aware of it or we can't discern exactly what it is, just knowing that God is with us. And that's why in a number of Tehillim, it says God is with those with a broken heart. Okay, now we have about 20 minutes left. Maybe we'll go an extra few minutes, we'll see. What we want to try to understand here is contemplating the interchange, the commonality between judgment and compassion that is going on during the 10 days of Tshuva, from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur. And even already, I should point out that we need a bit of a paradigm shift, but in a certain sense, right now is when the judgment is happening. Rosh Hashanah already is it's not too late, that's for sure. We have till Yom Kippur. But many people think the whole thing happens on Rosh Hashanah. I think we've discussed this already. No, that's why we were giving a whole month of Elul, is in a sense, this is when the tshuva should be happening. We get to Rosh Hashanah, we're told that if we did the cheshbon nefesh that we need to do down here, there's very little that they need to do up there on Rosh Hashanah. So we should all take advantage of this last week. And this is like the nitty gritty of trying to make the changes that we want. And of course, Rosh Hashanah through Yom Kippur, we have another 10 days. But why put off tshuva till then? Like, there's no advantage to putting off doing tshuva. So one of the images that we have from Chazal, from the sages, is that our plea on Rosh Hashanah is that God should get up from his kisei hadin, his throne of judgment, and to sit on his throne of compassion. This is one of the themes that runs through the 10 days. That there is a judgment happening. We're aware of it. There's not, in a sense, there's nothing we can do about it. That's why it says in Pirkei Avot, we're born against our will. We are judged against our will. We die against our will, and will be judged in the world to come against our will. This is not something that we can decide that we're for or against. It is part, just like there are laws of nature, physical laws of nature, there are spiritual laws. And the spiritual law is that there is a judge and there is a judgment. This is just part and parcel of Jewish thought. There is a judge and there's a judgment. But what we want to understand is that judgment and compassion are not exclusively opposites. In fact, our whole belief system, which is encapsulated in the Shema, is that Hashem Elokeinu. Elokeinu, of course, is Elokim. Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, we're always taught, is the aspect of love and chesed and compassion. And Elokim is din and judgment and borders and order. But what are we saying in Shema? Hashem Echad. God is one. So that is one of the biggest avodas of life in general, because we're all challenged pretty much 24/7. There's no escape, in a sense, from the realities of this world. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be joyous, doesn't mean we shouldn't be optimistic, but does anyone know anyone who doesn't have challenges? Does anyone know even a day going by without some little quirk, something? I know a lot of times when I go on vacation that sometimes if I can get through a day or two and just kind of cut loose of the world, everything in it, and just enjoy life in the moment, I'm so grateful. Usually within 2 or 3 days, there's an email, there's a phone call, there's chas v'sholom, this happens, whatever. That's life. But the laws of the universe are, we call them judgment, we call them gevura, but in truth, they're really chesed. Can anyone imagine if even for a split second, God would abrogate the laws of gravity? Can anyone picture the scene? Like everyone is flying off the planet? Like this. In other words, the laws of nature are good. When people make borders in their life, when people make order, make priorities, make a seder, what's called seder adifiyot, priorities, this is a good thing. It might look like gevura, but it's good. So one of the deepest hints is the name Elokim, which again, we always associate with din and judgment. If you look at the first 2 letters of the name Elokim, that is the name of God in of itself, Aleph Lamed. Aleph Lamed is always associated with chesed. We have 2 verses, chesed kel kol hayom. The goodness of God is all the day. And the other one is olam chesed yibaneh. God created the world with chesed. But if you look at the story of Bereshit, the only name that is mentioned is Elokim. The first telling of the story, 32 times, the name Elokim. Now, here we get into a deep understanding of Rosh Hashanah, because Rashi tells us that after the 6 days of creation and Shabbat, the Torah goes back and begins, in a sense, what's called the second telling of the story. Eile toldot Shemayim v'oretz behi baram b'yom asod Hashem Elokim eretz v'shamayim. These are the generations of heaven and earth in their creation, on the day that God created earth and heaven. So first of all, it should be pointed out the word behi baram, in their creation, there's a small hey. And in the Gemara, it says, if you take the letters of behi baram and you switch them around, it spells Be-Avraham. What is the attribute of Avram that we always associate with Avram? Is chesed. But if you notice in this verse, it's the first time that the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei is mentioned. So Rashi tells us that, a famous midrash, in the beginning, God wanted to create the world only with midat hadin, only with the attribute of judgment, meaning everything would work like clockwork. And like we said, there's a tremendous chesed to that. What if we didn't have the laws of nature? There would be no life. There would be no existence. The laws of nature allow existence and life to happen. But when God saw that the world could not exist with just din, he was mitzaref. He brought in chesed. So the question is, when did God bring in the chesed? When we read the story the first time, only the name Elokim appears 32 times. Where do we see the Yud K Vav K. So one way of answering is that until God created humanity, the world could work according to the laws of nature. But once God saw that Adam ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, if the world was only run by din, God already said, on the day that you eat from it, you'll die. But we see that he didn't die. Why didn't he die? Because there was compassion. There was, you get another chance. You get to fix it, olam hatikun. But then we have, so according to this idea, God only introduced compassion as it were an afterthought. That's what the Midrash says. God wanted to create the world from midah to din, but he saw it couldn't exist like that. So he added compassion. So we can understand that the compassion is because of man. But we have, at the same time, I already quoted it, Olam Chesed Yibaneh. God created the world from Chesed. So you'll say, well, which one is it? Did God create the world from Chesed, or did he create it from Din, from judgment? And the answer is that they're the same thing. Now this takes a lot of contemplation, especially in our own lives. Because when things aren't going the way that we would like them to go, it's not always easy to see the chesed that is there. That's where the real test comes. When everything's going well, I see God's chesed, and I see the laws of nature, and everything's working just fine. But when push comes to shove, that's when we have to really try to see how chesed and gevura, how Yud Ke Vav Ke and Elokim work together. They're not separate. They work together. Now, this idea, the truth is, we could develop this much, much greater, but I want to get to the deep connection of Rosh Hashanah, because this leads to how does the judgment on Rosh Hashanah actually work? It's highly paradoxical, and it needs a lot of contemplation. Because if we say that the whole year is judged on Rosh Hashanah, then we have to ask, well, where does free will come in? If everything is already decided on Rosh Hashanah, like, well, is free will a sham? It's like, what am I doing? It's all been decided. What's the point? So that's the question we have to ask. Now that is not the answer, but it's definitely the question. How does free will fit in here? So that's part of what Elul is about. We have free choice. Now is when we're trying to exercise our free choice to do tshuva. Now is the time that we can affect the din. The din that comes down on Rosh Hashanah is like the laws of nature. In other words, nature works very, very precisely with what we call midah keneged midah. In science, it's called for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. This is a law of science. We apply it spiritually all the time. There's so many stories in the Torah, we can't go into them right now. But I think people know in their own lives that so many times something happens to us and we make an immediate connection. I know why that is happening to me. It's because of X, Y, and Z. We make that connection. We see the Mida Keneged Mida that is happening. So on Rosh Hashanah, there is a judgment, and it's very, very orderly. And what is it made up of? It's made up of our thoughts, our speech, and our action of the previous year. That's what it means that God opens the books on Rosh Hashanah. And in Unatana Tokaf, in Musaf, we say, and the signature and the handwriting of each person is recorded in the books. So many people think that, as it were, there's some heavenly scribe that is writing down all of our thoughts and our speech and our action. And on Rosh Hashanah, it's given to God, and God sees all of it, and the judgment happens based on what we've done the previous year. But Musaf of Rosh Hashanah tells us slightly different, but it's a huge difference. It says the handwriting of each person is what's writing in the book. In other words, if we use the image of a computer, it's as if these books that are open, this is a computer program. And what is the program made up of, you and me and everyone else? It's based on software that each person inputs. Every thought, every speech, and every action is inputted automatically. It's automatically, but it's our thoughts, it's our speech, and it's our action. So it's our signature, it's our handwriting. So in a deep sense, we create our own judgment. That's what they say. What is a person's world to come like? Well, whatever we made out of this world, that will determine what our world to come is. It's not like it's superimposed on us. We create our world to come. So as far as free will and determinism, there is a level that things are determined on Rosh Hashanah based on what we've done. And so like in any science or any discipline, the past creates the future. Causes create effects. That's how things work. Now the question is, what about the rest of the year? Okay, it's now been decided because of everything I did in the previous year, perhaps everything I did in my whole life, perhaps everything I did in all my previous incarnations, that is going to determine what my year is going to be like. So, and perhaps maybe the most important statement of all of Rosh Hashanah is uteshuva, utefila, utsedaka, ma'avirin et ro'a hagezera. Shuva, repentance, prayer, and charity has the power to change any decree. This is true even on Rosh Hashanah when the judgment is being made. If we haven't done tshuva and we do what's called instant tshuva on Rosh Hashanah, we have the power to change the decree. Now, what happens the rest of the year? So, we'll call it in miniature, this principle still is in effect. That a sentence can be delivered. A person could be sent, let's say, to jail and have a specific sentence, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, life. And then during those years, something could happen. New evidence could come up. You read it in the paper all the time. unfortunately, all the time, people who languish in jail for many, many years, all of a sudden, new evidence comes up, and it turns out that they were innocent, and they're set free. So this is the secret of free will. That even once the judgment has been set, it doesn't mean that we no longer have any input whatsoever. We do have input. When it does get tricky, though, and Rabbi Nachman talks about this, I know the Ishbitzer talks about this, the Rambam talks about this. There are certain times when a decree comes down when it can't be changed. And Rabbi Nachman talks about this, that a person has to try to discern when it's before judgment and when it's after judgment. I'm just going to take an example. I'm not sure it's the best example, but let's say that someone is diagnosed with cancer, chas v'sholom. And so they ask, well, how long do I have? And the doctor will say, it's hard to tell, but it seems like 3 to 6 months. You should make preparations. Now, everyone knows that many, many people who get this kind of diagnosis live longer than that, sometimes many years longer than that. So here's a decree, in a sense, a person is decreed they have cancer. But it doesn't mean totally. And then there are other times when it gets to a certain stage that it appears to be after the judgment. And then it's better for a person to adjust their thinking process in order to, let's say, tie up all the loose ends. I'm not sure this is the best example, but it actually works. It actually works. So one thing I didn't mention before when we were discussing, and with this we'll try to tie it up, and then as always we will open it up for people's questions or comments. Just ask, that people unmute one at a time. That we were discussing, like, when was compassion brought into the picture of creation? So we have a statement that one of the things that was created before the world is tshuva. So if tshuva is created before the world, it must mean that God already had planned on introducing compassion. Because again, a person does something wrong. If there was only straight measure for measure kind of judgment, there's no room to fix it. You did this, this is what happens. But we're told that tshuva was created even before the world. And we learned in the beginning of the class that our neshamas also come, in a sense, before this world. That is the power of tshuva. And that's why we say, Ein devar omed lifnei tshuva. And there's a parallel statement, Ein devar sheomed lifnei haratzon. There's nothing that stands in the way of tshuva, and there's nothing that stands in the way of will. But it's obvious that will and tshuva go together. A person doesn't do tshuva lightly. It means expressing and manifesting a deep sense of ratzon, of will. I am going to change. I am going to do better. I'm going to introduce this to my life. I'm going to improve this way or that way. That only happens with ratzon, with will. Ein devar sheomed lifnei ratzon, ein devar sheomed lifnei tshuva. So hopefully I gave everyone a lot to think about. What we discussed today has many, many, many ideas associated with it, but I hope that it will give us food for thought. And I'll just end with a blessing for a new year, a year full of good health, of chaim, of a good life, of nachas from children and grandchildren. And
Great-grandchildren.
we should see peace in the world.
Amen.
Amen.
So if anyone has a question or comment or would like to add, whatever.
Rabbi Trugman, you
Mhm.
said that the world was created with din.
Wait, can I just ask who's speaking here?
Sipora Waternoff.
Okay.
Okay. But every day we say that man was created with Chokhmah when we do our Yitzhak Adam B'Chokhmah prayer. They're not the same, because din would be like, right?
Well, truthfully, part of God's wisdom is that there are steady laws of the universe that we can count on. This is part of God's wisdom that, there's a whole branch of science. I always forget the name of it. Someone knows, they could put in, but there's a whole body of science that looks at all of the factors that go into making life possible on Earth. And they have found that it borders on an almost impossible combination of hundreds of different factors. If just the tiniest bit differently, life could not exist. And there's a whole name for it.
Maybe cosmology?
No, it's not cosmology.
Not cosmology.
There's a name for it. If someone knows it, please jump in. But it's a serious science, and it just shows how much wisdom went into creation. So really, wisdom and judgment and chesed, they all work together.
I believe that, yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
I've been very engrossed in the question of Ratzon lately.
Mm-hmm.
So, ein davar omed lifnei Ratzon seems like anybody who's tried to do tshuva or anybody who's tried to go on a diet would disagree, because it seems like all kinds of things stand in the way of Ratzon. And many of them internal, some of them external, like there's that old saying, have you ever tried to go through a revolving door on skis? You might have the Ratzon, but there's certain technical difficulties.
Right.
So I just invite your comment on that.
Okay, so the kavanah of that statement isn't that there are no obstacles in people's way of accomplishing different things. It's assumed that there are obstacles. The statement is trying to say when you are really, really focused, you can do it. Now, you're right. There are, if I say, well, I want to just jump to the moon right now, you're right. I could have all the ratzon in the world, but that doesn't necessarily mean I'll be able to. But the meaning of their statement is when we shouldn't give up so easily. That if we really, really want something, that in, I'll say most cases, if we really apply ourselves, we can accomplish it. And that we shouldn't, remember this is very big in Breslov, the more obstacles you have, it proves that you're on the right path. Because if you weren't on the right path, there would not be any obstacles.
So the question is, how do we activate that ratzon to that degree?
So that is, a great question. Listen, we're not perfect, and all of us have things that we want to accomplish, and we do try. and we find too difficult, we don't do. But again, I think the kavana is just trying to encourage people that if, I don't think it was meant, I hear your question. Your question is very good because it sounds like an absolute statement. It sounds like it. But I don't think that that's their kavana. Their kavana is that a person can accomplish more than they think they can. That if you really, really apply yourself, you can do it. Like the little train that could, right? It's really like that story. It's, like everything was standing in the way of this little train making it up the hill. But the point of the story was, if you want it bad enough, you can do it. So, but your next question is even deeper. How do you get to that level of being able to apply your will? And really, the best answer that I can give, it might sound like people like I'm like, it's not a cop-out, but it's like, oh, you have no better answer. But I would say prayer. Because when we don't have the energy, we don't have the inspiration, and we want it, but it's not there, and we try, the best thing at that is to turn to Hashem and ask for the help that we need. I think that's the best. I'm going to tell a story. This
I have
was
to go, but thank you. And
okay.
Okay,
Someone else
Avram,
will-
before Alana goes, the name of that study is
Oh.
called the Rare Earth Hypothesis.
it might be. You looked it up
That's what I got from my search.
from Google. There's another
Right,
word.
it's like the improbability
Yes.
of life on Earth.
Right.
Yes, like there's a whole
and
body
all
of
the
science.
factors. It's
Yeah.
it's a field of astrophysics.
Yeah.
Okay. Shana
Thank you.
Tova to you both. Thank you for this
Shana
series. It's been
Tova,
wonderful.
Shana
I hope
Tova.
you'll keep
Shana
teaching
Tova.
the bus because it's been wonderful.
Okay, great. Yeah, everyone should know this is the last of the series for right now.
Yeah. Wishing you both Shana Tova and
Okay,
everybody.
Shana Tova. Okay, so I'm going to tell the story,
Chatima Tova.
and someone should give it over to Alana. One time, I asked Reb Shlomo, I said, how do we relate to obstacles?
She's great.
I said, one attitude is like I described about Breslov, is if I have obstacles, it means that what I'm trying to accomplish is really good, and I should apply myself even more, and I should just break through the obstacles, because the obstacles are there to tell me that it's a good thing, because for every action, there's an equal and opposite action. So if I want to do something good, it's not going to be a piece of pie. There's going to be opposite action. Or do we look at obstacles as God is sending us signs that this is not for you? It's not for you. You might want it. You might think you want it. You might have started it, but you're getting the obstacles because it really isn't for you. So I asked Reb Shlomo, how do you know which one is right? And for those who know the Moshav, it was in the grove of trees behind the Beit Knesset. It was just me and him. And I remember when Reb Shlomo would really, really think about something, he would look up and he would chuckle back and forth. And sometimes his eyes would literally roll back in his head. And I'm watching, and he's really, really trying to come up with a good answer for me. And what he told me is like this. He said, to answer your question about a particular set of obstacles, you need Ruach HaKodesh. You have to have, there's no way to tell. You have to be inspired to know which attitude you should take towards these particular obstacles. And he said, for that, you need prayer. and again, you could say, oh, he couldn't come up with something better, so that's what he told me, but I didn't take it that way at all. I've never forgotten what he said. And when I get into those situations where I really don't know what the signs are, I don't know what the obstacles are trying to tell me. Are they trying to tell me to go or to stop? And then I'll pray for it. I'll pray that God gives me guidance and gives me the wisdom to know the difference. And if I'm meant to break through those obstacles, that God should give me that koach to do that. Anyone else?
I have a technical question.
Okay.
Is there a chance that these lectures were recorded, that we could somehow?
Yes, actually,
Told
Judy
you,
is.
the lectures are
You
reported.
did?
It's you.
Yeah.
I told you this.
I don't know about the Bat Midrash, but Judy has been very, very, very kind and has sent me all the links, and I have put it up on my website. So if you go to my videos,
Oh, great.
you will find, I have a lot of videos. I'm not sure the link, my son's been doing it. But all of these are up on the website for people to go over in future years or even now.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Rabbi
Okay.
Trugman, I have to say that we've all really enjoyed this series. You know, there are just so many ideas. I mean, it's a good thing that they have been recorded. Ray's right. You know, it's a wonderful thing to have time to listen to it all, especially before Rosh Hashanah. And you know, we've benefited so much. We've really been filled up with so much beautiful Torah. And I thank you for it. And I hope you'll be with us again on another
Good.
First of all, thank you for inviting me. And I will look forward to other opportunities to teach to your group.
Amen.
And
In
hopefully
person,
there
in
will be
person.
a day when you will come to Tzfat again.
Oh,
I can't
right.
wait. I can't tell you how much. All I can say, it was a good thing that we got to Tzfat in January, just for like 3 days, 4 days, because it would have been like way too long, way too long. We really love Tzfat. We love the people in Tzfat. And we do look forward to getting there as soon as we can.
Amen.
Really look forward to it. Okay, take care, everyone.
Shana
Shana
Tova.
Tova.
Shana
Shana
Tova.
Tova.
Thank
Everybody,
you. Not Tova. Why? Brachas.
bye everybody.
Amazing. Thank you, Judy. God bless.
Thank you, Judy, again.
Bye.